Hello. Okay, I think I'm streaming. Let me make sure everything's looking good. Yes, amazing. Some reason the chat's not showing up for me. Let me see if I can, you guys can say some stuff in the chat so that I can see if it's working. That would be awesome. Let me just get that up. Where is it? Why is it not? Ah. There we go. Now it's not showing up my Chrome, which is very weird. Hi, Cole. Hi, guys. Oh my God, too many windows open. Sorry. Okay, there we go. Now I got my questions and my chat. Perfect. Hello. Sorry I'm a little bit late. I was trying to figure out if I could set up the whiteboard to do some stuff on it, but unfortunately my whiteboard right now is a lot of like secret stuff and I couldn't really erase it. It's in the process of planning things, and so I'm just going to try to do this verbally and then hopefully write out some tips on writing and post that on Patreon as well. But good morning for me anyway, or good evening or good afternoon or good middle of the night, wherever you guys are. So we're going to talk today about writing and what my writing process looks like and what writing I'm sorry if that's loud for you guys. There is a condo being constructed across the street from my apartment for the next 2 years. So that's fun. So it might be a little bit loud, but hopefully the power won't go out because that's been happening a lot too, which sucks. But anyway, as I was saying, this is going to be a little bit of a in the weeds discussion about writing that will hopefully be helpful and informative and provide a little insight into how things work in my world. So to start off, I figured it might be helpful to talk about kind of just how I go about planning each season and what that looks like, because something that we just did the other week, which was really exciting and new for me, was we had our first writer's room for the Bright Sessions spinoff, which is coming out in April, and which I'm super, super excited about because it's going to be really, really cool. Hey, Gail, I'm so happy you were able to join us. I hope that your classes have been going well. So yeah, so we did a writer's room for that, which was different for me because typically with the Bright Sessions, everything that I do with the Bright Sessions up until now has been alone. And then the bonus episodes have been kind of a mix of being alone and being in a writer's room, in the sense that I've had other writers writing them, but we haven't really had a room, as it were. So a writer's room is essentially, you know, you get together, you're in a room together, and you are pitching ideas, you're planning things out, you're bouncing ideas off each other. If you know, if you're writing a comedy, jokes are a big part of that, I would imagine. I've never actually been in a comedy room. Gail says, they're going super great except for one article by a Russian who never learned how to write, but 2 separate classes need me to read. Ugh, that's a bummer. But I'm glad that they're going well otherwise. That's awesome. School is really hard, so good for you. It's funny, like we spend all this time going through school to get out into the real world and like do things, and for the most part, work in the real world is more stressful than school, but like not nearly as hard, in my opinion. And I really like school. Hi, Rennie. Oh, it's so good to have you join us again. It has been a while. I hope that this is going to be a fun one. The ones with me I know are kind of weird, but hopefully it'll be fun. And also, if you guys have questions that are not writing related, feel free to ask them, because I know that sometimes people ask questions and then I say that I'll answer them in the next stream that I do just by myself, and then they never get answered. So feel free to just ask questions in general, but I'm gonna mainly keep this focused on writing, but we also can go off topic. That's fine, because hopefully I'm gonna turn what I talk about here into like a comprehensive thing that people can read, and that will be helpful for people. I'm trying to figure out how to make like a little like post that I can do with like pictures and stuff, because I have some, I can't show you guys the whiteboard now or what it's looked like the past couple months, but I can show you like what it's looked like in past seasons and things like that. You're writing a lecture at the Bright Sessions? That is so cool. Oh, reminder that your name is pronounced like Kyle with a hard G. Guile. Gotcha. Thank you. That's a great reminder. That's so cool that you're writing a lecture about the Bright Sessions. I'm so flattered. What's it about? I would love to hear more about that. I've gotten a number of like emails over the past year from college students writing papers on like audio drama or mental health, and they want to talk to me about the Bright Sessions, which is really cool. It's a really nifty thing. I love it. So yeah, so that's back to the writer's room. So with the bonus episodes, other writers have been writing it, but mostly what's been happening with that is I've been giving them kind of like an assignment. So this is the patient that you are writing. Here's what the specs that we know about them based on what we've heard in canon. And then they'll come back and say, okay, I kind of have had this idea, or I've had a couple of ideas of directions that we could take this. And I'll usually pick one. And then they'll do a draft and I'll give notes. And then they'll do another draft and I'll give notes. And then my sister, who's a psychologist, will look at it and give notes, and we'll kind of go back and forth. I'll do some just basic line edits to just like polish things up and make sure Dr. Bright sounds like Dr. Bright, and that the therapy speak sounds like the therapy speak that we've had in the show. But all of that kind of stuff is done over email for the most part. So it's been a very just sort of like written back and forth kind of note giving and collaboration, especially since some of the writers have been elsewhere. Gabrielle's in New York. And so, we've hopped on the phone about stuff, but mostly it's just done over email because that's easiest. Gail, a friend of mine and I are sending in offers on a whole bunch of podcasts, and we decided the 45-minute lecture on the metaphors and the various powers is totally doable. It's really about psychology. That's so cool. Oh my God. Well, if you can like share what you guys wrote after the fact, I would love to read that. That sounds amazing. I'm just so honored. I'm so glad that people are talking about us in school. That's so cool. So for the Bright Session spinoff, which I'm going to stop calling the Bright Session spinoff. I'm just going to tell you guys what it's called. I can't actually remember if I've mentioned it before, but it's not publicly announced yet. So like keep this between us, but it's also not like a huge secret. But it's called the AM Archives because it is about the AM. And I have announced that we have two amazing other writers beyond myself writing with me. So Caitlin Schneiderhan, who wrote the bonus episode that came out in November. So the one with Victor, the psychic. It's actually not for school. It's for the Israeli equivalent of Comic-Con. Ooh, even cooler. Oh my God, that's awesome. Yeah, the AM Archives. I'm really excited about it. So Caitlin Schneiderhan is one of our writers. She is the showrunner's assistant on Stranger Things here in LA. And she wrote the bonus episode with Victor this past month with the psychic episode, which is just so good. And then our other writer is Octavia Bray, who actually currently writes for the Disney Channel show Raven's Home and is just an incredible writer and loves podcasts and is amazing. And so the three of us had our first writer's room a couple weeks ago, and that was essentially, I had sent them an outline, a rough kind of like treatment of the series of like, here are the new characters, here's where we left our characters in canon, and here's kind of the general events of what's going to happen. And then we got together and we said, okay, we've got to tell the story over 16 episodes. Let's look at what that is. And so the thing that we started with was actually a Caitlin's suggestion, which is something that I'd done before, but never as formally. The way that I outline seasons, really, because I don't do episode outlines. I have to now because episode outlines for AM Archives are due on Sunday, and it would be very bad if I missed my own assignment and deadline. So I will be doing outlines for my episodes for AM Archives, which I've never done before. I've never done an outline for a Bright Sessions episode before, so that's a bit funny. But for seasons, I really kind of don't count the first 2 seasons of the Bright Sessions, the first 24 episodes, as like any kind of measure for like how to write or have a writing process, because I just like did those things. I kind of planned some stuff, but it was mostly just like seat of my pants, baptism by fire kind of thing. But then for seasons 3 and 4, from episode 24 onwards, we did 16 episode seasons. So that breaks nicely into 2 8-episode blocks, right? And we would always have sort of our mid-season hiatus. And then those 8-episode blocks separate nicely into 4 chunks of 4. And then, you can kind of whittle it down to 2 episode arcs and things like that. But that's how we broke down the season for seasons 3 and 4, how I broke down the season because I was the only writer then. And then that's also how we broke down the season for the AM archives. And so the thing that we started with at Caitlin's suggestion was breaking down each character's kind of arc within those 4 episodes. So we made a little chart where the top columns all say episode 1 through 4, episode 5 through 8, et cetera, et cetera. And then on the far left column, all of the character names. And then you go through and you say, this is what I want, where I want this character to and experience in this 4 episode arc. And so what I did, what I suggested once we kind of put this up on the board was like, okay, let's start at the end and let's figure out where all these characters end up, and then we can go back to the beginning and sort of figure out how to get there. That tends to be how I start things. I kind of have a general target that I'm going to, and then I try to plan out their arc there. The different thing about planning something like the AM archives versus the Bright sessions, even though I always have a plan for the Bright sessions in that 16 episode arc, and there's always a place that I'm going, I don't necessarily know what episodes 10 through 14 look like. And sometimes that can wildly change the end of episode 16. I'm trying to think of like a good example of this. I mean, no, there were no like huge plot or like character arc changes to the end of season 4. But I think one big thing that I didn't plan ahead for entirely was at the end of planning my 16 episode arc for season 4, I said, okay, so I want Dr. Bright and Sam to end this season and end this series with starting this new organization together and really getting it off its feet and sort of embarking on this journey, and for Dr. Bright to kind of leave her private practice. That was the big kind of closing door thing that I wanted. But by the time I got to maybe episode 8 or 9 of that season, I realized I don't want that now. I want them to go back to the AM. And so that was kind of a big shift that happened because of sort of who Agent Green became and what I was doing with Wadsworth and all that kind of stuff. And so having that flexibility is something that's important, and having the ability to say, okay, I'm going to actually go this way. For AM archives, because we are doing, we are planning detailed outlines of each of the episodes now simultaneously, and certainly things are going to shift around. We really do know where we're going to end up. This is also kind of a unique series in the sense that it's going to be, one season of this series, and it's really standalone, and a lot of the action happens in a very short amount of time. The amount of time that we are passing in these 16 episodes is the shortest amount of time that we've passed in any amount of episodes in the Bright sessions of any sort of season of the Bright sessions. So there's a lot less time to play around with and a lot less stuff that can happen. To answer Giles' question, you're more of a planner or a pantser? I am a plantser. So that's a NaNoWriMo thing. Well, I mean, that's how I'm familiar with the terms. Actually, I don't know if it's from somewhere else for you, Guile, but I tend to do that kind of general planning and then pants the rest, sort of fly by the seat of my pants on the rest. And certainly once you get actors into it, things can change a lot. And this is something that with the AM archives, there's 2 roles, one of which is extremely significant, that are not cast yet. And I have an idea of what those characters are, but that could totally change everything, if we get that actor in the room. And with this, there's going to be a lot less flexibility because we're going to be recording all of this pretty quickly, because the turnaround on this season is pretty rough. They exist independently, I think, but I don't remember where I know them from. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Planner and pantser, I mean, they're general terms, but I know them from NaNoWriMo, I think. So yeah, I tend to be a vague planner, and then I am pantsing a lot of stuff. It's funny to say that, pantsing. That sounds like you're pantsing somebody. Anyway, I can be a pantser, I guess. The more I say it, the less it sounds like a word. Well, it's not a word. But for AM archives, because we are essentially going to have the whole thing written by the end of January, and then we go into production in February, and we're going to record pretty much all 16 episodes at once because of just schedule, but also the nature of what the show is. It really makes sense to record it all at once. So if there is one of those things where like, you know, we have a not a romance necessarily. There's a lot. This is like the AM Archives is a departure. It's a lot plot heavier. It's a lot more like action heavy, if that makes sense. And there's a lot less there are fewer ships, I think, like fewer sort of canon ships in the show because there are fewer characters, kind of. But we have like a romance that won't be like a huge part of it, but that we want to kind of like introduce. And that's one of those things where it's like one of the actors isn't cast yet, and so I have no idea if they're going to have chemistry with the character that we're shipping them with. And that's something that, you know, hopefully in casting we can have the actor be in reads to see how the chemistry works and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, those are the types of things that normally I would be able to like, oh, like this Damien and Mark dynamic is different than I expected. I'm going to follow that track further down than I had planned. Getting to do things like that in the Bright Sessions was really fun and really exciting. We don't have that leeway with this, just in terms of like time and like the leanness of the story itself. And so that's going to be really interesting. We're going to have to plan a lot more, and I'm going to have to be a lot, I'm going to have to find ways to be flexible that are creative, you know, because you can't rewrite entire episodes in recording. So that's going to be a new experience for me. Jonathan Travers asks, is your process for the books different than for writing the podcast? Definitely. And I'm going to get to the books in a little bit. But I'd love to just finish running you through kind of how we plan the season. So we did those character arcs, and then we took each chunk of 4 episodes, and we broke that down onto the board and put, you know, episode 1, episode 2, episode 3, episode 4, and took that 4-episode chunk and figured out what happened in each episode. And, you know, while I'm writing stuff on the board, my other 2 writers are taking notes, but I'm also taking pictures of all the whiteboards and things like that. That's always helpful. And I will share those whiteboards with you guys eventually. I cannot share them now because they are so spoilery. That's the whole story. So I'll share those with you guys after the AM Archives airs. But I have some from previous seasons that I can dig up that hopefully I can share. But so we went through that, and a thing that was very, very helpful for me was in red pen. I have a bunch of different colored markers for my whiteboard, dry erase markers. And with the red pen, I would circle various things that it's like, okay, we need to figure out this particular plot point. We need to figure out who this character is, you know, because it's like, there can be a thing of like, Dr. Bright talks to X person to gain Y information, and we know what Y information is, but X person is somebody who like works at the AM who we need to like make a person now. And so just kind of keeping track of those things that you need, those blanks that you need to fill in. And so we did a little bit of a breakdown for each of the 4 episodes, and then I wrote that up and sent those to the writers, and then gave them episode assignments based off their preferences. And then now we're working on outlines. And so it's a really, really broad stroke type of thing. And again, this is pretty new for me because typically what would happen is that I would actually be doing all of this digitally. The whiteboard is kind of a new thing for me, which is why I'm not totally sure that I have whiteboards from previous seasons, because I did some planning on whiteboards, but mostly I would have it all in my Evernote. And I would kind of break down the episodes, and I would just write like vague little notes because I wasn't having to share them with anyone. I wasn't having to lock down and say, okay, this is what episode 12 is going to look like. That's your assignment. You know, go out and write an outline for that. I would sort of say like episode 12, maybe an Adam episode. Who knows? You know, it's like I would sort of be those types of vague ideas. And I would sort of work up to, you know, episode 6, and then I would have an idea of like what episode 12 was going to look like. Let me just check really quickly what questions. Okay, yeah. So Dwayne Farver had a question for me about kind of outlines. So he asks, for TBS, did you focus on an outline of the story arc, or did you let it unfold? What characters changed from your original concept? So yeah, I've sort of talked about that a little bit already, where I had an original story arc planned for each season, and certainly for the first season, I had an original story arc that ended up changing a lot because Dr. Bright was initially going to be much more villainous and much more much even more of an anti-hero than she was. I do think that she's an anti-hero because she does a lot of shady things for the right reasons, or for reasons that are, you know, good. She's trying to get her brother free, but I kind of had that general thing. But then I really did let it unfold because I didn't know what I was doing back in like seasons 1 and 2. But then even in seasons 3 and 4, I knew that I wanted season 3. By the time that we ended season 2 and Damien and Mark were like off on this weird road trip together, I knew that season 3 was going to be about getting Mark back and then sort of defeating Damien. And then season 4 was going to be kind of the denouement from that. Because I've mentioned this before, the fight that happens between Caleb and Damien at the end of season 3 was initially going to be the end of season 2, and was going to potentially end in Damien's death. And then Damien ended up being such an interesting character to me. And when Charlie suggested that maybe he helped break Mark out, that was such an interesting concept. And that, of course, spun out a lot of new story. So that confrontation between him and Caleb happened at the end of season 3. But I wanted that to happen. I wanted that to sort of be the climax of Caleb's arc, and of sort of like there's sort of 2 major arcs in the Bright Sessions. There's like the character groundedness emotional arc, and then there's the kind of like plot AM arc, which is this sort of the B plot of the whole thing. And so that is, you know, Mark and Dr. Bright getting Mark out of the AM and getting to safety. Whereas the emotional arc is really everybody sort of finding their way through their growth in these abilities that they're struggling with. And that was really always the point of the series. And to get Sam to a place where she was dealing with her anxiety, to get Caleb to a place where he was having to confront his impulses, to get Chloe to a place where she could live with her ability. Of course, that ended up being, you know, sort of changed by the fact that sort of the plot clashed with that in terms of her experiencing, you know, head trauma and stuff like that. Obviously changed it. Yeah, it is interesting that the plot is the B plot, but I'm glad that you agree, Guile, because I like that is what I wanted to do with the Bright Sessions, was have the actual plot be secondary. And so to me, the climax of the whole series is that confrontation between Caleb and Damien, because they are in so many ways opposites of what they do. You know, Damien imposes his emotions on people in a sense. It's sort of one emotion. It's just his desires onto people. And then Caleb, of course, is absorbing everybody's emotions. And also, I think like the thing that was subconsciously, in many ways, the whole thesis of the series, that was something I think is one of those strange things about writing, right? Is like I started this to be like, I want to talk about anxiety and also just like get out some grievances about how hard it actually would be to live with a superpower. Because I love a lot of superpower media, but I think it would be really, really hard. And a lot of superpower media does confront that. But I wanted to get way, way into the weeds with it. And so that's how I started the Bright Sessions, with sort of those 2 things in mind. And really what it ended up being was like, oh no, Lauren, you want to talk about masculinity. And that's really what the whole series ends up being about in some ways, where that ultimate confrontation between the 2 of them is about 2 types of masculinity clashing, and sort of the consequences of masculinity and the consequences of violence, and particularly male violence. Because in so many ways, even though Caleb is the perpetrator of violence and of male violence in that episode, he's the good masculinity, right? It's protective, and it is honorable, and it's coming from a place of love. And that doesn't mean that it doesn't have consequence. Whereas Damien's is all the toxic masculinity. I think Buffy confronted that, but it's definitely what attracted me to this series. I'm so glad we brought that up when we talked about the lecture. Yay! Well, and I think that, like, you know, it's really easy to look at Caleb and Damien and be like, okay, yes, those are 2 opposite ends of masculinity, and that's that confrontation, and it has consequence and all that kind of stuff. But even in like season 4 with Sam, Sam has a lot of, I think, negative masculine traits, where she is, you know, she's very much, I'm right, and the way that I'm doing things is right, and she gets a little tunnel vision about it, and, you know, that puts her down this slippery slope. And you know, she doesn't want to talk about her feelings. She's fine to talk about other people's feelings, but she doesn't want to talk about her own feelings, which is a traditionally very masculine thing. And so, you know, dealing with that theme in all of my characters was kind of like that ended up being the thesis of the series in a way that I didn't expect. This is all to say that those are the things that I had to just let unfold. And the fact that even though I knew that that was going to be the climax of the series and I wanted to talk about consequence of violence and all that kind of stuff, certainly Damien changes the character. The relationship between Damien and Mark was hugely different than I expected. Wadsworth was a lot more layered than I expected her to be because having Alex play her was so, just brought in so much softness to her. Frank was a completely different vibe masculinity than any of the others. How much of that did you write and how much was the actor? Oh, that's a great question, Lindsay. Frank, it's funny. Frank is the character that changed the least from conception to end results. And I think it's because the moment I thought about him and I was thinking about Chloe encountering him, I thought about Philip. Because Philip is just the softest person. I mean, he's such a nice guy. But also, I was in class with him, and I remember he and Charlie did this scene from Pulp Fiction in class once, and it was like Philip was just so like charismatic and so like kind of bravado masculinity in a way that was really, really like charming and enticing, and in a way that that also was the same reason that I cast Andrew as Mark. Was Andrew did a scene in class once that was like very kind of like charming bravado masculinity, and I was like, that's what Mark needs to have, because I knew that both Philip and Andrew could do like the more emotional heavy stuff. I knew that, but it was the sort of charm and bravado that I needed for both of those characters. And the interesting thing about Frank is that we never actually see that side of Frank, because that's a side of him that's so buried. But I needed the actor to have that just in their body. Because like, I do think that Frank was someone who was extremely confident, and he's so capable, right? He was so good at being a Marine. And he was so in his element when he was with his unit. And that's something that's been completely stripped away from him. And so I needed somebody who had that, but then who also had, you know, this real softness to them and this real genuine heart to them. And so I wrote Frank specifically for Philip, and Frank's appearance in the podcast was completely contingent on getting Philip. And so I kind of chased Philip down and was like, it's like, this is a small job, and it's this weird little podcast, and it's this really emotional episode that I'm going to be writing for you, but I would love for you to do it. Please, please, please say yes. And he said yes. And so that was really a marriage of just like knowing exactly what I wanted out of that, and then getting the actor to deliver on exactly what I knew they could deliver on. And so that was really like just a wonderful kind of kismet thing. Cole, I appreciate the Bright Sessions has some definite introvert folks. Do you think about things like that when you're writing their dialogue? Oh yeah, totally. Because I think when you're writing dialogue, I'm always thinking about like a big objective in acting, because that's often how I'm approaching writing is, or big, I guess I should say, like exercise in acting is finding your objective. And so of course you have your objective for the scene, but every line that you say as an actor should be, you need to figure out what you want from the other person. And it's not always a thing of like, I want you to do this for me, right? Sometimes it is that direct. But sometimes it's just the underlying thing of like, I want you to comfort me. And so with introverts and extroverts, sometimes it's like, I want you to do the work in this conversation for me, or I want you to go away, or I want to end this conversation, you know, like versus extroverts of like, I want you to give me energy. I want you to sort of be here with me. And so that can be underneath the dialogue that I'm writing for those characters. And I certainly think about, you know, each of those things. And it's funny because some of those things are complicated by abilities, right? Because I think that Sam is different from me in the sense that she's an extrovert. I think she does gain energy from other people, but just the nature of her life, she's kind of got introverted tendencies. Versus Caleb, I think is like may have ended up being an extrovert in life, but because of the way that his ability functions, being an extrovert or introvert is entirely dependent on who he's with, right? He can be an extrovert with Adam. He gains energy from Adam, but with everybody else, definitely introverted. Philip is amazing. Yes, he's amazing. That episode's the only episode we ever did 2 takes of, because I got to the end of the second take and I was like, we're done. We can't do more. That's enough. And I got 2 perfect takes, and let's all go cry now, because we were all just crying by the end of that recording session. It was brutal. It also took like an hour and a half. Oh yeah. Guy, I saw that question, and it's a great question, and I'm going to answer it. Yes. So it's pretty intuitive who gets to write what. Do you claim any particular episodes for yourself regarding the AM archives? Yeah, let me actually pull up the outline here did I do the episode assignments already on that? No, okay, it's buried somewhere. It was actually pretty intuitive. It's funny how it worked out. So I told them, because it's 16 episodes, and so I was like, all right, we're each gonna write 5 episodes. I had already written the pilot, which just makes sense. And then I figured we'd like all write the finale by committee, or, when it comes to that, I'll just write it, or what have you. It would make sense for me to write 6 episodes and for them to each write 5. 16 does not neatly divide into 3. But so I said, send me your top 6 episodes in order, like ranked of what you'd like to write. And then also send me your top 2 preferences for each chunk of 4, so that I, because if your top preferences are episodes 2 through, 7, then you're not writing anything in the back half of the season, and I want to make sure that we're evenly distributed. And so for that, they sent me their preferences, and it was funny because they had different top 2 preferences, and so everybody got their top 2 picks, but then each of them wanted to write a lot of the same episodes, which was interesting. And so there were a couple of places where like people kind of got like a 3rd-tier preference or what have you. But what was really interesting was that there were a couple of episodes where I was like, if this is somebody's top preference, I might have to just say no, because it's like it makes sense for me to write this episode. And it was funny, neither of them put those episodes on their list. And so I ended up with the episodes that like there were certain episodes that like maybe would have been fun for me to write. But that like sometimes as sort of the head writer, you kind of have to be like, okay, like I'm going to take the kind of homeworky episodes. And so there were a couple of those episodes that I was like, just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to have to write these. And thankfully, the way that it panned out, they didn't put those on the preference list, I think, because they sort of intuitively knew that I was going to have to write those. For example, there's not a lot of therapy in the series, but there is one therapy episode, essentially right in the middle of the season, that I knew that I was going to have to write, because it's like, it just makes sense for me to write that, even though Caitlin has written a bonus episode and so knows how that functions. Like, yeah, it would make sense for me to write that. Same thing with, there's like a kind of a Sam-centric episode, and so it wouldn't necessarily make sense for somebody else to write that, because obviously like she's mine. So yeah, those types of things, even if like, I'll be totally honest, like I love Sam, but I'm ready to like let her go, I think. I'm excited to like dive into new characters. Even if I would have loved to like pawn that off to somebody else, at the end of the day, it's like, it really only makes sense for me to write it. So it's kind of taking those things on. And same thing with like the pilot. It makes sense for me to write the pilot, because I need to establish where we are and what everybody sounds like. So yeah, she is mine. And it's like, it's going to be really interesting, because nobody else has written her before. Now a lot of writers have written Dr. Bright, and I've kind of tweaked some of the dialogue in the bonus episodes to make Dr. Bright really sound like Dr. Bright. But like, Sam speaks in such a specific way that I know obviously better than even any other character, that I'm kind of curious to see how I edit those scripts. Because obviously Sam is going to be in episodes that Caitlin and Octavia write. And I'm kind of worried I'm just going to end up like, I mean, they're amazing writers, but I'm such a neurotic, dictator about the way that she speaks, because it's the way that I speak, and I'm going to have to be speaking those lines that I know exactly how they're supposed to sound, that it's going to be interesting to see kind of how much I end up rewriting, just out of like specificity. So, and that's actually a great lead into Troy's question, which is, when I rewrite / edit, is it more often for continuity / clarity, or for impact? I would say it's mostly for continuity and clarity, especially for clarity. Like typically when I, hey Frost, yes, this is the Writing Specific live stream. Welcome. Ask all your writing questions. I hope it's been informative so far, and hopefully I'm going to turn this into a like helpful post at some point. So yes, rewriting. So when I rewrite, I am always talking aloud, and sometimes I will rewrite for impact, but typically the sort of impact lines are like the things that actually get me into the scene. And then I will kind of move back from there. So when I'm rewriting and going through things from editing somebody's script, it's usually for clarity. It's usually for, at this point now, actually for what's the word I'm looking for? For like cutting out the fat, because I think that there's like something I've learned is like there's a balance to be found in naturalistic writing of like how people actually talk and not talking in circles. And I think like in the past Bright Sessions has talked in circles a little bit, and that is just the nature of therapy sometimes, where you do have to talk in circles a tad. And so finding that balance and making sure that like not brevity, but that like we're being economical, right? About like how we're talking. So that's kind of part of the clarity issue. Hi Frost, how is my NaNoWriMo? Not awesome. I did not win. I only did 18,000 words. So not great. How's your NaNoWriMo? Who did NaNoWriMo and who won? Tell me. So yeah, my next couple months are kind of crazy because I'm working on the AM archives, and then I've been doing these bonus episodes, and then I have another job that I'm doing that I'm writing on that I cannot tell you guys about, but that I'm very excited about, and so that's been taking up a lot of my time as well. So NaNoWriMo kind of fell by the wayside. Oh my God, you did 75,000 words? Wait, why didn't you win? That totally counts. That should count. 29,000 words is amazing. Putting together stuff for my blog and stuff I did for school. That totally counts. That counts, guys. I think that counts. I won last year, but that was kind of cheating because I had to get the book done for my novel that was due. And that's what I tried to do this year, and it just didn't happen. But it's due in March, so I've got 3 more months. It should be fine. It should be fine. But I started the Damien novel. Basically, that was what I was jumping into. And I'm liking it so far. It's been fun to write, and it's coming out a little bit easier than the Caleb and Adam novel did. I think just because like there was a lot of canon stuff to work around with the Caleb and Adam novel, whereas this is just like anything goes. It's 10 years before. We have no context for this. So I'm excited about it. I'm going to spend the Christmas vacation, I think, writing it, which will be fun. But that's a great transition into novel writing process. A couple people have asked, I think John asked earlier. Yes, Jonathan asked about novel writing, and then Lindsay asked in the comments, how was writing novels different from writing the show? What did you do to make the novels good for a YA audience specifically? Which is a great question that I'm not even sure I did right. I don't know that I did it right for a YA audience. My 110K fic took 4.5 years. Frost, you did amazing. Yeah, guys, all of these are amazing accomplishments. So many people don't write anything. And so this is all amazing. Congrats to everybody. It doesn't matter how many words or when you write them or how long they take. You guys are doing awesome. You're killing it. So the novel writing process, I wish I could say that I had one. I don't outline, which I need to do. It's a bit of a theme in my writing is that I don't outline, and that's not good because it's good to outline. So yeah, I need to outline more. And because really with the Caleb and Adam novel, I just kind of jumped in and just wrote it and just checked in with canon stuff. And sometimes I would like write chapters further along in the story and then, kind of lead up to them and that kind of stuff. With the Damien novel, I'm just like writing scenes, and it's like, hopefully I'm going to write 75,000 worth of scenes and then just find a story out of there. The hard thing about writing novels, it's very, very different from writing the show. It's a completely different beast. Is that I have to think about where I am a lot more, like think about what it looks like, um, and kind of describe, like set a scene in a way that, you can't do in dialogue and that we do mostly in sound design. Um, and then, yeah, I mean, like, it's funny because writing dialogue is essentially the same for me. Um, but everything else is very, very different. I actually don't have more to say about it. It's just vastly, vastly different. And I wish I had a good advice for how to like jump into a novel, and I just don't yet. And to Lindsay's question, what did I do to make the novels good for a YA audience specifically? I mean, I wish I could say like, oh, well, making sure that it's like age appropriate content. Certainly the K-bottom novel, there's no like sex or violence in it, but there's lots of swearing because they swear a lot. That might have to get taken out a little bit because I think we're trying to aim it slightly younger. And currently I say fuck a lot in the novel. And so I might have to take some of those out. um, but for everything else, I mean, it's just my voice, I think. I write stuff that's good for YA just because that's what I read. And so that's the voice that I naturally um, lean into. Also, stuff that's dialogue heavy is typically for younger, like the more dialogue there is, the younger the audience, typically. Like that's usually the metric they measure things on. And so for me, coming as a scriptwriter, like that's been a good transition to have like lots of dialogue. How am I with descriptions? Yeah, it's not my favorite thing. It's funny because like in the Caleb Adam novel, there's like very little description because so much of the description is what Caleb is feeling. Um, and then kind of like them describing each other and like what's going on in the moment. So the sense of place is not super, super strong as a part of it. With the Damien novel, it takes place in LA. And so it's like, that's been a little bit easier because I'm basing it on a real place. And so actually, like, I would maybe start there if you have a hard time with descriptions, even if you're like saying like, oh, okay, this is taking place at a high school based off of like your high school or your college, if it takes place at a college or whatever it is. Even if you're not saying it by name, just like using real environments as a reference point is something that I found very, very helpful to me because then I don't have to, because I'm not a visual person that like, I'm not going to imagine like a really, really detailed high school. It's like the thing that I imagine when I'm like reading something or, listening to something or like playing D&D. I was playing D&D on Saturday and like our DM is amazing and is able to like paint these pictures and create like environments. But like what I'm picturing is never like that detailed. I'm always picturing like where the characters are in relation to each other, their body language, what their expressions look like. Like that's what because I'm always so character focused that for me, it's really helpful to have a real reference point. And so for the Damien novel, it all takes place in LA, which is where I live. And so the first scene as it stands now, essentially what's the first scene? I guess it's like the third scene, takes place in a bar that's around the corner from my house. So they're just like, Damien's gonna walk into a bar. It's gonna be this bar because I know what the inside of this bar looks like and I'm gonna describe it. And then there's a couple like, every time he's at an apartment, it's like, I'm thinking about a friend's apartment because I'm thinking about like how everything is laid out. And so for me, it's really helpful to have those reference points. Okay, lots of things happening in the chat. Hold on. I outlined my fic, but in the end, I ignored most of it because it took so long to write. I forgot most of the plot points in it. Yeah, outlining is good, but then it's also sometimes good to throw away the outline. I say as a person who's never done any outlining. Oh, dialogue is challenging. Okay, yeah. I mean, this is the thing. It's like there's always going to be something that's hard, and it's good to exercise those muscles. Writing 110K in Hogwarts counts as a real place, right? Absolutely. No, for sure. Hogwarts is a place that I can imagine very well. And name town nobody ever names, so just so I can describe a place I go to frequently. Exactly. Yes. Like even if you don't name the town, just like having that at least for yourself, and you can describe it, and people aren't going to necessarily know that like that's your CVS in your town, but you'll know and you'll be able to describe it well. How much research do I do while writing? I find it's a trap for me. That's an interesting question. Cole, do you mean that it's a trap where you just like you just end up doing so much research that you're barely writing at all? Is that what you mean? Because I definitely have fallen into that trap a couple of times where I find myself doing research for things that like are never going to actually come up. But I do think that that's important sometimes. I think you want the context. It was really funny, actually, when I met with Caitlin for the first time to talk about AM archives. I'd shared with her, before I met with each of the writers, I'd shared with them the, the sort of the treatment and what I was planning on. And, oh, how can I talk about this particular thing that happened without giving stuff away? So there's an atypical, there's a new atypical in the series. There's a couple of new atypicals in the series. And one of them has an ability that deals with a real world thing, if that makes sense. And so I did a lot of research on that real world thing, despite the fact that like that's never really going to come up in the show. I just wanted to know how this thing worked. And so I did a lot of research, and when I met with Caitlin, we were talking about it, and she was like, okay, so, and she opened her book. She's like, here, how I figured out how this thing works in the real world. And I was like, oh my God, you did the exact same research. I think you read the same Wikipedia page that I did. We kind of talked about it, and it's like, it's a very like math and science heavy thing in the real world that we're like kind of adapting into an atypical ability. And because we're adapting into like a made up thing, we don't actually need all that context, but I still think it's helpful. And so I don't know how you get out of that trap. I think maybe like setting a limit for yourself, like a time limit. So a thing that I'm doing right now for another project also takes place sort of in a reality adjacent to ours. You know, like most of the stuff I'm writing next year is like our world plus, right? It's like our world, but there's atypicals, or our world, but there's supernatural stuff happening, or our world and there's whatever, right? And so there's flexibility within that, but you always want it to be grounded. And one of the things I'm working on takes place in a specific place and time. And so actually, two of the things I'm working on take place in a specific place and time. And so I'm doing research on those places and those times. And, you know, if your time period is like the 19 teens, I mean, that's a huge decade where a lot of hugely important things happened around the world. And life was very, very different depending on where you are. And so you could do research on that forever. I'm not doing something on the 19 teens. I chose that because it's just a random time period. And you could do endless research. And so what I like to do is say, okay, you're going to read just this book, or you're going to watch just this documentary, or you're going to spend just this 4-hour chunk on Tuesday just doing research, and whatever research you get done in that period of time, that's it. That's all you get. And if you need more, if you encounter a thing, you know, further down the line where you need more research, you can dive into more research. But I think just setting hard limits. So like, for instance, for Frank, actually in the Bright Sessions, I wanted to make sure that his experience was grounded, despite the fact that his experience as a veteran is different because it involves a lot of non-real things. But I still wanted to ground that in reality because it's a very sensitive topic. And so I read Tribe by Sebastian Junger, which is about soldiers returning home. And I also watched a couple of HBO documentaries about specifically Afghanistan and Iraq and PTSD within those wars. And then that was it. And it's like, there was lots more research I could have done. I could have chosen a specific place for him to have lost his unit and like researched that, all that kind of stuff. But and well, then I also did like basic research on stats and things like that and chose Afghanistan as the place that the war that he fought in, because that people saw more combat there, all that kind of stuff. But that was kind of like the limit, because at the end of the day, I have to make my own story, and I can't just like, you know, tell the exact story of somebody who fought in Afghanistan and just like rip that. That's not interesting. That's also not very nice to that person. It's alarming how much research on murder I did for my fic. Oh yeah, I've done some really, really weird, really, really weird research for stuff. Like how to poison people, how to dismember people, you know, like all sorts of creepy stuff. Spent 30 minutes doing research in order to reply to an anti-gun control ask today that I could have easily just not answered. So you get to doing way too much research thing. Yeah, it can be a trap. So I think that setting hard limits for yourself is important. And those hard limits can be like, I'm just going to consume this one thing, or it can be like, I'm just going to dedicate this amount of time to doing research, and then I'm going to set a timer, and once I'm done with that, I'm done. But I do think the research is important, even if it's stuff that doesn't end up in what you're writing. Like so much of the research I did for Passenger List, which should be coming out soon, hopefully, never made it into the scripts, but I just needed to understand stuff, and I needed to have context. And so help how fast does poison take? Exactly. Typing, oh, my Google search history is so weird. Do I need to call the police? Exactly. Google being like, all right, great, you're on a watch list now. No, that's not how it works. We're all okay. All right, we only have a couple minutes. So I want to just make sure I answer the questions that you guys had in the comments. And if there are any questions in the chat that I've missed, please write them out again so I don't miss them. So Andrea asked a great question. How do you decide what medium is best suited to the story you're trying to tell? How do you deal with imposter syndrome? Do you ever have to abandon an idea or dramatically change it? If so, how do you go about it? Lots of really great questions. I know that I can get to all of them. But how do you decide which medium is best suited to the story that you're trying to tell? I think sometimes you just have to try it. I do. I think, so with the Caleb Adam novel, one of the reasons that exists was that I knew the Caleb story and him discovering all the stuff through therapy was going to be best suited for this podcast, right? And all this dialogue. But his romance with Adam was really something that was best suited to a YA novel. And that was just something that in writing out his first couple episodes with Dr. Bright was just something that I discovered. And so then I started to write that novel just as an exercise, not expecting that it would ever get read by people. And now it is. And that's really exciting and scary. But just as an exercise, because I just felt in my gut that that was how that romance was going to be best told. And then it was a way of finding out how to incorporate that into the podcast. So sometimes it's gut stuff. Sometimes you just have to experiment and just like, you know, try writing out like the podcast version of your TV script and seeing like how important the visuals actually are, or vice versa, or writing out like the first chapter of a novel of, you know, your film scripts, things like that, and just sort of testing things out. And then you really just have to follow your gut, because I think that any story can be told in any medium. You know, like for instance, like Sam's story, like her character journey could have been told in any number of mediums, but it was about the way in, the angle that I wanted to take on her. I wanted her to experience it with somebody else and to go through that journey with somebody else. And so therapy was the way in, rather than, you know, figuring out through the lens of time travel, which might be like a more novel or even like a TV, you know, version where we can see or imagine the journeys that she's going on. So I think just like figuring out the angle that's most exciting to you and then figuring out what your gut is telling you. I think that that's just trust your gut. For us, by the way, Lauren, I told you about my fic a few live streams ago. It was the Ace Attorney Super Duper Slow Burn. I think it's wrapping up at about 150,000 words. That's incredible. Congrats, Frost. That's amazing. Kyle, how much of your process is the writing and how much is the editing? How much is trusting your gut and how much is trusting your editor / research / etc.? Very, very good question, Kyle. I would say the actual writing of it, the actual writing of the script is like 30% of the process. Research and editing and all that kind of stuff, planning is a huge, huge portion. But then for me, like writing dialogue is pretty easy for me at this point. Like I like it. I know how I like to write it. But editing is a huge, huge piece to make sure that it can be the best that it can be. And then making sure that I am equipped going into the writing, and that's all the research and stuff. The trusting your editor is a tricky thing. I think, it's hard. I mean, it's so like my book editor is amazing. Her name's Allie. I love her. She's awesome. And she gave me so many notes on my first draft where I was like, oh, like I love this thing that I've done that you're telling me to get rid of, but I also know that you're right. And so that was kind of like an interesting thing of like trusting my gut and trusting her. And just knowing that like she was right about things, and that even though I loved it, that like my gut was telling me to trust her, which I realize is a bit of a cop-out answer, but I think that like trusting that she knew best and trusting that it wouldn't be losing the you know, the sort of the heart of the book if I lost those things, versus like right now we're trying to find a title. It's been a bit of a journey to find the title that I'm happy with and she's happy with and marketing is happy with. And they've made a couple suggestions, and in my gut I'm like, I understand from a marketing perspective why you want to do this, and I'm not going to budge on it. I don't want that title. And sort of like, you know, having a hard line about those things. I've never told my editor she's wrong, but there was one thing on this last edit that we did. My manuscript's officially accepted, so we're done with the big edits, which is exciting. But there was one on the last edit that we did where she was like, I know that you added this scene based off my first edit, but now I think actually it takes away the impact of this next scene. So I think that maybe you should just cut it. And rather than telling her she was wrong, I was like, no, give me a chance to convince you that this scene works. Because the scene was initially kind of like, it wasn't her suggestion, but it had come out of her suggestion. This all happens in sort of the first 50 pages of the book, which was the biggest part that I edited kind of to like, to sort of set up the book and all that kind of stuff. And so out of her notes in the first round, I'd added this scene, and then she was like, I don't know that it works for me. And so I asked her to sort of give me a chance to let me convince her to make it work. And I added in some stuff. I tweaked some stuff, and then I convinced her. She was like, you're right, that works now. Let's keep it. And that wasn't like a kind of kill your darlings thing of like, I can't lose this scene. It was more that I was just, my gut was telling me, I understand why you believe it's taking away the impact, but I think that what it serves for the rest of the story is more important. And I think I can make it just as impactful as the scene that you're talking about. And so it was trusting my gut with that, and that I could trust to make it work. How much, oh wait, you mentioned earlier that you had some scenes you liked that you had to get rid of. Did you ever get an answer about putting them out, not in the book? I have not gotten an answer on that yet. We've been going back and forth on edits, but yes, I'm hoping I can kind of release those things to you guys, but I need to ask them about that. I'm hopefully seeing them in like right before Christmas. I'm hopefully going into the offices when I'm in New York, so hopefully I can ask then. Okay, we are actually at almost at our time, and I've got a phone call at 10:15, so I can actually stay over today. Oh my God, I'm so happy that you got the Alice Isn't Dead novel and the Limetown novel. I haven't gotten those yet. I'm so excited. I can't wait. I just want to make sure that I've answered everybody's questions. I hope this was helpful. I'm going to try to take at least some of this stuff and turn it into a post that you guys can reference about like outlining a season and all that kind of stuff, and going about things, editing, researching, all that kind of stuff. But I hope this was helpful. I hope that you can come back to it and reference it. Definitely hit me up with more questions about writing on the Discord. Just make sure to like at me, because I'm not always on the Discord, so it's good to you know, get notifications. And yeah, thank you so much for watching and for supporting. You guys just make my life. It's the best. And this month, the bonus episode is coming out in 2 weeks from today. And it is the Gabrielle Urbina, Zach Valenti episode. I have not heard Misha's first round sound design yet, because it's the most intensive sound design they've ever had to do for Prayer Sessions episode. So I'm very excited about that. And yeah, just thank you guys so much for your support. These bonus episodes would not be possible without you. And I have to say, it's been so fun bringing in new actors and new writers to this world and getting to just let them run wild. So thank you so much. And I will see you probably in a couple weeks. We're going to schedule one of these. So yeah, I'm very excited. All right, guys, thank you so much. And I'll talk to you later. Good luck with writing. You guys got this. Bye.